The millionaire forced his spoiled daughter to marry a beggar to teach her humility, but what he didn't expect was that they would actually fall in love. The squeal of a red Ferrari's tires echoed through the parking lot of the luxury Beverly Hills Mall. Alexis Hartley, a 25-year-old with perfectly groomed blonde hair and designer clothes, jumped out of the sports car, tossing the keys to the valet with disdain. "Watch the paintwork, darling. Daddy just gave me this little present," she said with an affected smile, adjusting her designer sunglasses. Alexis strode confidently through the gleaming corridors of the mall, her presence causing a mixture of admiration and envy. The only daughter of technology magnate Maxwell Hartley, she lived a life of privilege and excess that few could imagine. As she passed one shop window after another, occasionally waving to the salespeople who recognized her, her phone rang. It was her father. "Hi, Dad. Miss you already," she joked, her honeyed voice hiding a hint of irritation at being interrupted during her shopping ritual. "Alexis, I need you to come to my office right away." Maxwell's voice sounded serious on the other end of the line. "We have an important matter to discuss." His father's tone made Alexis hesitate for a moment. "But Dad, I just got to the mall. It can't wait until—" "Now, Alexis?" Maxwell interrupted her, his voice leaving no room for argument. With an exaggerated sigh, Alexis spun on her heels, abandoning her plans to spend a small fortune on clothes and accessories. "All right, I'm on my way," she muttered, hanging up the phone. 30 minutes later, Alexis entered the imposing building that housed Hartley Tech's headquarters. The employees greeted her with forced smiles as she made her way to the private elevator that would take her directly to her father's office. Upon entering the room, Alexis was greeted by the sight of Maxwell Hartley, a middle-aged man with gray hair and piercing blue eyes, sitting behind his mahogany desk. His expression was a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Sit down, Alexis," he said, indicating the chair in front of him. Alexis obeyed, crossing her legs and adjusting her Chanel skirt. "What is it, Dad? You look so serious. Did someone die?" she joked, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. Maxwell didn't smile. Instead, he slid a folder across the table towards his daughter. "Open it," he ordered. Intrigued, Alexis opened the folder and her eyes widened when she saw her bank statement. "Dad, what is this? Why are you showing me?" She stopped abruptly when she noticed the final balance. "There must be some mistake. Where's the rest of my money?" "There's no mistake, Alexis," Maxwell replied, his voice firm. "I froze your accounts and canceled all your credit cards." Alexis felt as if she had been slapped. "What? You can't do that. Why would you do such a thing?" Maxwell leaned forward, his eyes fixed on his daughter's. "Because you're out of control, Alexis. Your excessive spending, your irresponsible behavior, your complete lack of empathy for those less fortunate than you. It has to stop." Alexis laughed nervously. "Dad, you're exaggerating. I'm just young, having a bit of fun. There's nothing wrong with that." "There is when you spend more in a month than most people earn in a lifetime," Maxwell retorted. "It's time you learned the value of money and, more importantly, the value of people." Alexis felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that tone of voice. It was the same one her father used when he was about to close a big deal. "What do you mean?" Maxwell stood up, walking over to the window that offered a panoramic view of Los Angeles. "I have a proposition for you, Alexis. One that will change your life and, I hope, open your eyes to the real world." "What kind of proposal?" Alexis asked, her voice trembling slightly. Maxwell turned to face her. "You're getting married." Alexis blinked, confused. "Marry? To whom?" "The son of one of your businessman friends." "No," Maxwell replied, his voice calm but firm. "To a man called Jack. He works as a janitor in one of my buildings downtown." Alexis' jaw dropped. "A janitor? Is that some kind of sick joke?" "It's not a joke, Alexis. It's a lesson," Maxwell explained. "Jack is an honest, hardworking, and kind man. He lives on the bare minimum, but still finds ways to help others. He's exactly the kind of person you need to get to know and learn to respect." Alexis stood up abruptly, her chair scratching the marble floor. "You've gone mad. I refuse to take part in this madness." Maxwell remained impassive. You have two options, Alexis. You can accept my proposal, marry Jack, and learn to live like an ordinary person for a year. If you do that, not only will I restore your accounts, but I'll also double your trust fund. Alexis narrowed her eyes. And what's the other option? You can refuse, Maxwell said simply. But if you do, you'll be completely cut off. No money, no car, no apartment, nothing. Alexis' blood ran cold. She knew her father was a man of his word. If he said he would cut her off, he would do so without hesitation. That's blackmail, she hissed. That's fatherhood, Maxwell corrected. It's time for you to grow up, Alexis, to understand the value of hard work, compassion, and humility. 1 year with Jack will teach you more about life than all your years of spending my money. Alexis slumped back in her chair, her mind spinning. The idea of marrying a janitor disgusted her. But the prospect of losing everything was even worse. And if I accept, after a year, I can divorce him. Maxwell nodded. If after a year you still want a divorce, I won't object, but you'll have to live as his wife during that time. No cheating, no going back to your life of luxury. Alexis closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a mixture of anger and resignation in her gaze. All right, she said at last. I accept. A small smile formed on Maxwell's lips. Good. Jack will be here soon. The two of you will go to the registry office today to make the marriage official. Today, Alexis exclaimed. But I don't even know him. Exactly, Maxwell replied. It's time you started meeting people outside your bubble, Alexis. And don't worry, Jack has already been informed about the deal. He's agreed to take part in exchange for a generous donation to the homeless shelter where he does voluntary work. Alexis felt a wave of nausea. Her perfect world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Alexis' heart raced when Maxwell said, "Come in." The door opened, revealing a tall, thin man with tousled brown hair and gentle green eyes. He was wearing simple jeans and a flannel shirt, looking completely out of place in the elegant office. "Mr. Hartley," the man said, his voice surprisingly soft. "I'm Jack Thompson. Did you call me?" Maxwell smiled, gesturing for Jack to come in. "Yes, Jack. Come in, please. There's someone I'd like you to meet." As Jack hesitantly entered the room, Alexis' eyes widened in shock. This was the man she was supposed to marry, this ordinary worker. Jack, for his part, seemed equally surprised to see Alexis. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, something indefinable passed between them. Alexis quickly looked away, her heart beating furiously. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to change drastically. And so, in that office at the top of Los Angeles, the stage was set for a story that none of those involved could have foreseen. A story of difficult choices, life lessons, and, perhaps, unexpected love. The afternoon Los Angeles sun bathed the small apartment in the Echo Park neighborhood in golden light. Alexis Hartley was standing in the middle of the living room, her designer bags contrasting grotesquely with the modest surroundings. Her eyes roamed the space, absorbing every detail with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "So, that's it?" she asked, her voice laden with barely disguised disdain. Jack Thompson, now officially her husband for less than 24 hours, scratched the back of his head, visibly uncomfortable. "Yes, this is our home," he replied, trying to sound optimistic. "I know it's not much, but it's not much," Alexis interrupted him, turning to face him. "That's smaller than my closet." Jack sighed, closing the door behind them. "Look, Alexis, I know this is difficult for you. It's not exactly an ideal situation for me either, but we can try to make the best of it, right?" Alexis let out a bitter laugh. "The best we can. How exactly do you suggest we do that? I don't even know where to start living like this." She gestured vaguely towards the apartment. "How about we start by putting your things in storage," Jack suggested, picking up one of the suitcases. "I'll show you where you can put your clothes." Alexis reluctantly followed him into the small bedroom. When Jack opened the closet, She couldn't hold back an exclamation of horror. Is this it? Where are all my things supposed to fit? Jack shrugged, a shy smile playing on his lips. I guess we'll have to get creative. Maybe it's time for a closet clean out. The look Alexis gave him could have frozen hell over. Don't even think about it. Every item here costs more than you make in a month. Jack's smile disappeared, replaced by a hurt expression. Look, Alexis, I understand that this is a big adjustment for you, but there's no need to be cruel. I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. Alexis felt a twinge of guilt, but quickly stifled it. I'm sorry, she mumbled, not sounding the least bit sorry. I'll sort it out later. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as Jack showed Alexis the rest of the apartment, the tiny bathroom, the cramped kitchen, the small balcony overlooking the busy street. And where am I going to sleep? Alexis finally asked, noticing that there was only one double bed in the room. Jack blushed slightly. I'll, sleep on the sofa. It's your bed. Alexis nodded, grateful that at least she didn't have to share the bed with him. Good. I think I'll take a shower now. I need to process all this. Jack nodded, looking relieved to have a moment alone. Of course. The towels are in the bathroom cupboard. I'll make us something to eat. As the hot water ran down her body, Alexis closed her eyes, letting the tears she had been holding back all day finally fall. How had her life changed so drastically in less than 48 hours? Yesterday morning, she was Alexis Hartley, the Princess of Beverly Hills. Now, she was... what? The wife of a janitor. The thought made her choke on a sob. She rested her forehead against the cold tiles, letting the reality of her situation sink in. A year. She would have to live like this for a whole year. When Alexis finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a silk robe, she refused to use Jack's rough towels. The smell of something cooking filled the apartment. I hope you like macaroni and cheese, Jack said from the kitchen. It's one of the few things I know how to make well. Alexis approached hesitantly, watching Jack stir a pot on the stove. I've never actually eaten that, she admitted. Jack looked at her, surprised. Really? It's practically a staple of American cuisine. Well, I'm sorry if my diet didn't usually include poor people's food, Alexis retorted, instantly regretting her words when she saw the hurt expression on Jack's face. You know what? Jack said, turning off the stove. I think I've lost my appetite. Help yourself if you want. I'm going for a walk. Before Alexis could reply, Jack grabbed his jacket and left the apartment, the door closing with a soft thud behind him. Alexis stood in the kitchen, feeling strangely guilty. She looked at the pot of pasta, the tempting aroma making her stomach rumble. Reluctantly, she picked up a plate and helped herself to a small portion. Sitting alone at the small kitchen table, Alexis hesitantly tasted the first forkful. Her eyes widened in surprise. It was good. Really good. The cheese was perfectly melted, creating a creamy texture that enveloped the pasta. As she ate, Alexis found herself looking out of the window, wondering where Jack had gone. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her felt bad for kicking him out of her own house. Hours passed and Jack still hadn't returned. Alexis tried to watch TV, but the program seemed strange and uninteresting. She rummaged through Jack's bookshelves, finding an eclectic collection of books, from literary classics to practical home repair manuals. Finally, unable to bear the oppressive silence of the apartment, Alexis decided to go out. She swapped her robe for a simple dress, the simplest she owned, which still probably cost more than the monthly rent for the place, and went out into the Los Angeles night. The streets of Echo Park were a completely different world from Beverly Hills. Latin music echoed from nearby apartments. The aroma of street food filled the air, and people of all ages and backgrounds passed her by, some casting curious glances at the woman obviously out of her element. Alexis walked aimlessly, taking in the sounds and smells of the neighborhood. She passed small family-run stores, cozy bars, and parks where children were still playing, enjoying the warm summer evening. It was in one of these parks that she spotted a familiar figure. Jack was sitting on a bench, watching a group of children playing basketball on a lighted court. Alexis hesitated, unsure whether to approach him or not. But before she could decide, Jack noticed her. "Alexis?" he called out, sounding surprised. "What are you doing here?" She approached slowly, feeling strangely shy. "I couldn't stay in the apartment. I decided to take a walk." Jack nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. Echo Park can be quite interesting at night, especially for someone who's never been here before. Alexis sat down next to him, keeping a safe distance. Different," she admitted. "Noisy, chaotic, but somehow alive." Jack laughed softly. "That's a good description. This place has soul, you know? It's not polished and perfect like Beverly Hills, but it has character." They sat in silence for a few moments, watching the children play. Alexis noticed how Jack smiled every time one of the children made a basket, as if he knew each of them personally. "Do you come here often?" she finally asked. Jack nodded. "Almost every night. I help coach the neighborhood basketball team on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other nights, I like to come here to clear my head." Alexis looked at him curiously. "Why? I mean, why bother coaching kids who aren't yours?" Jack stared at her, his green eyes shining with an intensity that took her by surprise. "Because someone has to care, Alexis. These kids, many of them don't have much, but basketball, it gives them a purpose, a chance to dream of something bigger." Alexis felt something strange in her chest, an emotion she couldn't name. Before she could respond, one of the children shouted, "Hey, Mr. Jack, do you want to play?" Jack smiled broadly. "Sure, guys. Just a moment." He turned to Alexis. "Do you want to join us?" Alexis laughed nervously. "Me? Play basketball? No way. I'd probably break a nail." Jack rolled his eyes, but his smile remained. "All right, princess, but one day I'm going to teach you how to have real fun." With that, he got up and ran onto the court, being greeted by excited shouts from the children. Alexis watched him play, noticing how he seemed like a completely different person on the court, laughing, joking, patiently teaching the children. It was a side of him she hadn't expected to see. As the night progressed and the stars shone faintly through the light pollution of Los Angeles, Alexis found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Jack Thompson than she had initially thought. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to this new world she found herself in than she was willing to admit. The shrill sound of the alarm clock roused Alexis from her sleep. For a brief moment, she wondered why her bed felt so hard and why the air conditioning wasn't working. Then, reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. This wasn't her bedroom in Beverly Hills. This was her new life. With a groan, she stood up, her bare feet touching the cold floor. The apartment was silent, but she could hear the distant sound of traffic outside, a constant reminder that she was far from home. Alexis staggered into the kitchen, expecting to find a state-of-the-art coffee maker. Instead, she came across Jack, already dressed for work, fiddling with an old filter coffee maker. "Morning, Alexis," he said, a cautious smile on his face. "Coffee?" She nodded, still too sleepy to speak. Jack handed her a mug, and she took a hesitant sip. To her surprise, it was surprisingly good. "Thanks," she mumbled, taking a seat at the small kitchen table. "What time is it?" 6:30, Jack replied, joining her with his own mug. "Sorry about the noise. I usually leave early for work." Alexis frowned. 6:30? I didn't even know that time existed. Jack laughed softly. "Welcome to the real world, princess. Some of us have to work for a living." The comment hit Alexis harder than she expected. She put the mug down on the table with a little more force than necessary. "I work," she protested. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, and what exactly do you do?" Alexis opened her mouth to reply, but realized she didn't have an adequate answer. Her last job had been as a fashion consultant for a luxury boutique, which basically meant that she got free clothes for showing up at the store occasionally. I used to," she stammered, feeling her face heat up. Jack sighed, his expression softening. Look, Alexis, I'm not trying to judge you. But part of this deal is for you to learn about the real world, right? Maybe it's time to think about getting a real job. Alexis stared at him, a mixture of indignation and fear in her eyes. A job? I don't even know where to start. Jack finished his coffee and stood up, putting the mug in the sink. How about we start with something simple? There's a coffee shop down the street that's hiring. Why don't you stop by today and pick up an application form? The thought of working in a coffee shop made Alexis feel nauseous. Me? Serving coffee to strangers? No way. Jack looked at her with a mixture of exasperation and compassion. Alexis, you can't sit in this apartment all day for a year. Besides, a bit of honest work might do you good. Before Alexis could protest further, Jack picked up his backpack and headed for the door. Think about it, okay? I'll be home around 6. Maybe we can have dinner together and you can tell me about your day. With that, he left, leaving Alexis alone with her thoughts and a half-empty mug of coffee. The next few hours passed painfully slowly. Alexis tried to watch TV, but the morning program seemed banal and uninteresting. She scoured her phone, but most of her friends had already canceled her after finding out about her sudden marriage to a nobody. Finally, unable to bear the boredom and feeling strangely guilty for doing nothing, Alexis decided to give Jack's suggestion a go. She got dressed, opting for a simple dress and sneakers, the most casual items she owned, and left the apartment. The morning air in Echo Park was surprisingly pleasant. The streets were full of life. Mothers taking children to school, workers hurrying with their briefcases, street artists preparing their performances for the day. Alexis walked hesitantly to the cafe Jack had mentioned. It was a cozy place, with large windows and plants hanging from the ceiling. The aroma of freshly ground coffee and fresh bread enveloped her as soon as she entered. "Welcome to Grind Shine," a young barista greeted her cheerfully. "What can I do for you today?" Alexis hesitated, her heart pounding. I hear you're hiring." The barista's expression lit up. "Oh, yes. Let me get the manager." "Marina," she shouted to the back, "we have a candidate here." Moments later, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and a warm smile emerged from the kitchen. "Hello, dear. I'm Marina. I hear you're interested in working with us?" Alexis nodded, trying to look more confident than she felt. "Yes, I'd like to fill out an application form, please." Marina studied her for a moment, her keen eyes noticing Alexis' expensive dress and manicured hands. "Have you ever worked in a coffee shop before, dear?" Alexis swallowed. "Actually, no, I've never worked anywhere before." To her surprise, Marina just smiled. "Well, we all have to start somewhere, don't we? Come with me, let's talk a bit." The next 2 hours were a roller coaster of emotions for Alexis. Marina guided her behind the scenes of the coffee shop, explaining the different machines, the types of coffee, how to make a perfect cappuccino. Alexis found herself genuinely interested, asking questions and even laughing at Marina's humorous jokes about difficult customers. At the end of the visit, Marina gave Alexis a green apron with the cafe's logo on it. "Normally, we put people through a more formal selection process," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "But something tells me you need this as much as we need you. How about starting tomorrow? Morning shift, from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Me?" Alexis held up her apron, a mixture of emotions crossing her face. Fear, excitement, pride. It was hard to tell which one predominated. Yes, I'll be here." When Alexis left the cafeteria, the afternoon sun was already high in the sky. She walked back to the apartment in a state of mild shock. She, Alexis Hartley, had a job, a real job. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Alexis cleaned the apartment, more out of nervousness than necessity. She even tried to cook something for dinner, although the result was slightly burnt noodles. When Jack arrived home at 6, as promised, he found Alexis sitting at the kitchen table, her green apron carefully folded in front of her. "Hey," he said, taking off his shoes. "How was your day?" Alexis looked at him, a hesitant smile on her lips. I got a job. Jack's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Really? Wow, Alexis, that's incredible. Where? That coffee shop you mentioned, she replied, her voice a mixture of pride and uncertainty. I start tomorrow. Jack sat down next to her, a broad smile on his face. I'm proud of you, you know that. I know it can't have been easy. Alexis felt something strange in her chest when she heard those words. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of her? Thank you, she murmured. I'm nervous. Jack put a comforting hand on her shoulder. It's normal, but you'll do fine. And hey, at least now you'll get free coffee, right? Alexis laughed, the sound surprising them both. I suppose so, although, after tasting the gourmet coffee there, I don't know if I can go back to your cheap filter coffee. Jack pretended to be offended. Hey, don't insult my coffee. It's a family recipe. For a moment, they laughed together, the tension of the last few days dissipating a little. When the laughter subsided, Alexis looked at Jack with a more serious expression. Jack, thank you for pushing me into it. I think I needed it. Jack smiled softly. You're welcome, Alexis. That's what I'm here for. We're a team now, remember? Alexis nodded, feeling strangely comforted by those words. Team. Maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. As they shared the slightly burnt noodles and planned the next day, Alexis found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could survive this year after all. And who knows, maybe she could even learn something in the process. Night fell over Echo Park, and in the small apartment, two strangers forced into an unusual marriage slowly began to find common ground. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since all this madness began, Alexis felt a tiny spark of hope. The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the silence of the bedroom at 5:30 in the morning. Alexis groaned, groping blindly for the device. For a moment, she considered ignoring it and going back to sleep, but the memory of her new job made her sit up abruptly. First day, she muttered to herself, rubbing her eyes. You can do this, Alexis. She dragged herself out of bed and headed for the bathroom, where she spent longer than necessary getting ready. Old habits die hard, and Alexis still felt the need to look impeccable, even if it was just to serve coffee. When she finally emerged from her room, dressed in skinny jeans, a simple blouse and the green apron from the coffee shop, she found Jack in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Morning, Star, he smiled, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table. Ready for the big day? Alexis sat down, looking at the food with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. I think so, she replied, her voice betraying her nervousness. What if I mess it up? Jack sat down opposite her, his own plate in his hands. Everyone makes mistakes on their first day, Alexis. The important thing is to learn from them and move on. She nodded, forcing herself to eat despite the knot in her stomach. Easy for you to say. I bet you've never had a disastrous first day. Jack laughed, almost choking on his coffee. Oh, you'd be surprised. On my first day as a janitor, I accidentally set off the sprinkler system in the entire building. It was chaos. Alexis couldn't help laughing at the mental image. Really? And you didn't get fired? Almost, Jack admitted with a smile. But my boss saw that I was really sorry and willing to fix my mistake. Sometimes it's more about how you deal with the problems than the problems themselves. Alexis pondered this as she finished her breakfast. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe the secret was just to try. With one last nervous glance at Jack, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up, Alexis left the apartment and headed for the cafeteria. Grindshine was already bustling when she arrived. Marina, the manager, welcomed her with a warm smile. Welcome to your first day, darling. Ready to take the plunge. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Alexis was bombarded with information about different types of coffee beans, brewing techniques, the workings of the cash register, and dozens of other things she never imagined she would need to know in order to serve a cup of coffee. Her first customer was a hurried businessman who ordered a double latte with almond milk and a touch of vanilla syrup. Alexis looked at the espresso machine as if it were a rocket control panel. I... I'm sorry, sir, she stammered. I'm new here and... No problem, dear, Marina intervened gently. I'll show you how it's done. With infinite patience, Marina guided Alexis through the process, explaining each step. The client, surprisingly, didn't seem irritated by the delay. He even gave Alexis an encouraging smile when she finally handed him the order. Hey, we all have to start somewhere, right? He said. I'm sure you'll be an amazing barista in no time. Those simple words made Alexis feel strangely moved. It was the first time anyone other than Jack or Marina had expressed confidence in her abilities. Well, in anything other than spending money. As the day progressed, Alexis began to get the hang of things. Of course, she still made mistakes. She spilled milk, changed orders, and once almost put salt instead of sugar in a customer's coffee. Luckily, Marina intercepted the disaster in time. But with each mistake, she learned something new. What surprised Alexis most was how she began to enjoy interacting with customers. There was something comforting about seeing the same faces every day, learning people's names and preferences. It was a kind of connection she had never experienced in her previous privileged life. When her shift finally ended at 3 p.m., Alexis was exhausted but strangely satisfied. Marina stopped her before she left. You did very well today, Alexis, she said with a proud smile. Many people would have given up after the first coffee spill, but you persisted. That shows character. Alexis felt her face heat up at the compliment. Thank you, Marina, for giving me a chance. Everyone deserves a chance, dear, Marina replied, giving Alexis a gentle pat on the shoulder. Now go home and get some rest. Tomorrow will be another full day. Alexis walked back to the apartment, her feet aching in what she had previously considered comfortable shoes. She had never stood for so long in her life, but along with the physical pain, there was a strange sense of accomplishment. When she entered the apartment, she found Jack sitting on the sofa, reading a book. He looked up when she entered, a smile spreading across his face. Hey, look who survived the first day. How was it? Alexis threw herself down on the sofa next to him, taking off her shoes with a groan of relief. It was intense, exhausting, scary. She paused, a small smile forming on her lips. And kind of amazing. Jack laughed, putting the book aside. That's how it should be. Do you want to tell me about it? To her own surprise, Alexis found herself pouring it all out. The mistakes, the successes, the lessons learned. Jack listened attentively, asking occasional questions and laughing along with her at her funniest stumbles. You know, Alexis said after finishing her account, I never thought I'd say this, but I guess I like working. It's tiring and sometimes frustrating, but there's something satisfying about doing something on your own, you know? Jack nodded, a glint of pride in his eyes. I know exactly what you mean. It feels good, doesn't it? Knowing that you've achieved something through your own efforts. Alexis reflected on this for a moment. Yes, it is, although I still miss my spa days and endless shopping, she added with a wry smile. Jack laughed. Well, maybe we can find a middle ground. How about a bubble bath and a Thai dinner to celebrate your first day at work? Alexis' eyes lit up. That sounds perfect. But can we order the food? I don't think I can stand up any longer today. Sure, Jack smiled, reaching for his phone. You deserve a break. After all, tomorrow's another hard day's work. As Jack placed the order, Alexis leaned back on the sofa, letting the day's events run through her mind. She thought about Marina, the kind customers, even the mistakes she had made. It was all part of her new life now. A life that, surprisingly, didn't seem as bad as she had imagined. Later, as she savored her pad thai and listened to Jack tell stories about his own first days on the job, Alexis found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, her father was right. Maybe she needed this. This chance to discover who she really was, away from the shadows of her wealth and privilege, and maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to like the person she was discovering. The scent of coffee still hung around her clothes, a constant reminder of her working day. But instead of bothering her, Alexis found that the smell comforted her. It was the smell of a new Alexis, one that was just beginning to emerge. When she finally went to bed that night, exhausted but satisfied, Alexis fell asleep with a smile on her face. Tomorrow would be another day, full of new challenges and opportunities. And for the first time in a long time, she couldn't wait to see what the day would bring. 3 weeks had passed since Alexis started working at Grind Shine. The routine, once so strange, had now become almost comfortable. Waking up early, making coffee with Jack, spending the day in the cafeteria, and coming home exhausted but strangely satisfied. That Saturday morning, however, something was different. Alexis woke up to the sound of excited voices coming from the living room. Confused and still drowsy, she got up and walked silently to the bedroom door. "You can't go on like this, Jack." The voice was feminine, full of frustration, and something that sounded dangerously like hurt. "Liv, please try to understand." Jack's voice was soft, almost pleading. Alexis froze. "Liv? Who was Liv?" "Understand what, exactly?" "The woman," Liv retorted. "That you married a complete stranger? That you're living a lie?" Alexis' heart raced. She knew she shouldn't be listening, but she couldn't turn away. "It's not a lie," Jack replied, his voice tired. "It's complicated, I know. But..." "Complicated?" Liv let out a bitter laugh. "Jack, we were planning our future together. And then, out of the blue, you marry this spoiled little princess from Beverly Hills. How do you think that makes me feel?" Alexis felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Jack had a girlfriend. Why hadn't he ever mentioned it? "Liv, I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice laced with emotion. "I should have told you before, explained the situation. But you have to believe me. It's not what you think." "Oh no," Liv challenged. "Then explain it to me, Jack, because from my point of view, it looks like you've traded our plans, our future, for money." There was a long moment of silence. Alexis held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. "It's not about money," Jack finally replied, his voice low but firm. "It's about doing the right thing. Alexis, she needs help, Liv. She needs to learn about the real world, about what it's like to live without the money and status she's used to." "And you volunteered to be her teacher?" Liv asked, her voice now more sad than angry. "It wasn't like that," Jack sighed. "Her father, he approached me. He offered a substantial donation to the shelter if I agreed to marry Alexis for a year, to teach her about hard work and normal life." Alexis felt her legs go weak. She leaned against the wall, trying to process what she was hearing. Hadn't Jack volunteered for this? Had he been approached by his father? "And you accepted?" Liv's voice was almost a whisper now. "Liv, you know how much the shelter means to me," Jack replied, his voice pleading for understanding. "With this money, we can expand, help more people. I couldn't say no." There was another long silence. Alexis could hear her own heart beating in her ears. "I understand why you did it, Jack," Liv finally said, her voice calm but laden with sadness. "It's always been your way, to put others first. But what about us? Where does that leave us?" Jack let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know, Liv. I really don't know." "Well, when you find out, let me know," Liv replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Until then, I think we'd better keep our distance." Alexis heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly retreated into the bedroom, closing the door quietly behind her. She heard the front door open and close, followed by a long silence. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Alexis tried to process everything she had heard. Jack had a girlfriend. His father had orchestrated the whole arrangement. Jack had only accepted to help the shelter. She didn't know what bothered her more, the fact that Jack had hidden Liv's existence, or the revelation that he hadn't really chosen to be in this situation. After a few minutes, Alexis took a deep breath and left the room. She found Jack sitting on the sofa, head between his hands. "Jack," she called softly. He looked up, surprised. His eyes were red and tired. "Alexis, Didn't know you were awake. I heard voices, she admitted, sitting down next to him. Who was she, Jack? Jack closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his courage. Liv, my ex-girlfriend. Ex? Alexis asked, raising an eyebrow. Jack had the decency to look embarrassed. It's complicated. Then explain it to me, Alexis said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Because from what I've heard, it sounds like you abandoned your plans with her to marry me for money. Jack stared at her, shocked. Did you hear our conversation? Part of it, Alexis admitted. Enough to know that my father came to you, not the other way around. Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Alexis had learned he did when he was nervous. Alexis, I'm sorry. I should have told you about Liv, about how all this really happened. Yes, you should, Alexis agreed, feeling a mixture of anger and hurt. Why didn't you? Jack sighed deeply. At first, I thought it would be easier if you didn't know, and then I didn't know how to approach the subject, how to tell you that I had a life, plans, before all this. Alexis felt a lump form in her throat. And what happened to those plans? They changed, Jack replied, looking directly at her. Alexis, when your father came to me with this proposal, my first reaction was to refuse. It seemed crazy, unethical even. But then he showed me photos of you, told me about your life. And I saw an opportunity to make a difference, not just for the shelter, but for you too. Alexis felt tears forming in her eyes. So it was out of pity. You accepted because you felt sorry for the poor little rich girl who knew nothing about the real world. No, Jack said firmly, taking her hand. I accepted because I saw potential in you, Alexis. Potential to grow, to change, to become someone incredible. And over the last few weeks, you've proved me right. Alexis blinked, surprised by the intensity in his voice. But what about Liv? Your plans with her? Jack let go of her hand, leaning back on the sofa. Liv and I, we'd been together for 2 years. We talked about marriage, children, the future, but there was always something keeping us apart. My work at the shelter, my desire to help others. She never fully understood. Do I? Alexis asked skeptically. Jack smiled slightly. More than you realize. Alexis, in the last few weeks, you've gone from someone who's never worked a day in her life to someone who gets up every day at 5:30 in the morning to serve coffee to strangers. You complain, yes, but you do it. And more than that, you're learning, growing. That inspired me. Alexis felt her face heat up at the unexpected compliment. But you've given up everything for this. Your girlfriend, your plans. I didn't give up, Jack corrected softly. I chose a different path. One that, honestly, has been more rewarding than I could have imagined. They were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Jack, Alexis finally said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry. For causing problems between you and Liv, for complicating your life. Jack shook his head, a soft smile on his lips. Don't be. Alexis, you haven't complicated my life. You've enriched it. Watching you grow, learn, become this incredible person. It's been an incredible journey. Alexis felt something strange in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something else she couldn't name. Even so, she insisted, you've given up so much for me. How can I make it up to you? Jack looked her in the eye, his expression serious. Keep growing, Alexis. Keep learning, pushing yourself, becoming the best version of yourself. That's all I ask. Alexis nodded, feeling a renewed determination. I promise, she said softly. I won't let you down, Jack. Jack smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his eyes. I know you won't. They sat side by side on the sofa, a comfortable silence falling over them. Alexis realized that, for the first time since all this madness began, she really felt at home. Not in the apartment, but there, next to Jack. And as the morning sun filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in a golden light, Alexis wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand what her father had expected her to learn from all this. That sometimes life's greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places. And that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted in order to discover what you really need. Summer gave way to fall in Echo Park, the leaves on the trees turning shades of gold and red. For Alexis, the days melted into a comfortable routine, punctuated by small moments of growth and self-discovery. One particularly pleasant Saturday afternoon, Alexis decided to surprise Jack with a home-cooked dinner. She had never cooked anything more elaborate than instant noodles before, but over the last few weeks, watching Jack in the kitchen and watching tutorials online, she had gained a little confidence. Farfalle in pesto sauce with grilled chicken, she muttered to herself, reading the recipe on her cell phone. It can't be that hard, right? 2 hours, 3 minor burns, and a completely messy kitchen later, Alexis heard the key turning in the lock. Jack entered, carrying shopping bags, and stopped abruptly when he saw the state of the kitchen. "Alexis," he called out, a mixture of concern and amusement in his voice. "Is everything all right in there?" Alexis emerged from the kitchen, flour in her hair and pesto sauce on her cheek. "Did I, made dinner?" Jack looked from the chaotic kitchen to Alexis and back again, before bursting into laughter. "I see you did. And what exactly survived this apparent culinary apocalypse?" Alexis grimaced, but couldn't help smiling. "Hey, don't mock my efforts. Come and see for yourself." She guided him to the kitchen table, where 2 plates of pasta were laid out, accompanied by a bottle of cheap wine she had bought at the corner grocery store. Jack looked at the meal, genuinely impressed. "Wow, Alexis, that looks really good." "You don't have to look so surprised," she joked, giving him a gentle push. "Come on, sit down. Let me serve you like the perfect housewife I clearly am." Jack laughed again, but obeyed, taking a seat at the table. Alexis poured the wine into plastic glasses, they hadn't yet invested in real glasses, and sat down facing him. "So," she said, suddenly nervous, "what do you think?" Jack picked up his fork and took a bite. His eyes widened in surprise. "Alexis, that's delicious!" Her face lit up at the compliment. "Really? You're not just saying that to make me feel better." "I would never lie about food," Jack replied solemnly, already taking another forkful. "Honestly, I'm impressed. A few months ago, you barely knew how to turn on the stove." Alexis felt a wave of pride run through her body. It was true. Not so long ago, the idea of cooking a full meal would have seemed as alien as learning to fly an airplane. But here she was, not just cooking, but cooking something that Jack really enjoyed. "Well," she said, trying to sound casual, "I learned from the best." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, and who would that be?" "YouTube, obviously," Alexis replied with a mischievous smile. They laughed together, the atmosphere light and comfortable. As they ate, Alexis couldn't help thinking about how her life had changed. Here she was, in a small apartment in Echo Park, sharing a home-cooked meal with a man who, a few months ago, she barely knew. And the most surprising thing? She was happy. "So," Jack said, wiping the last trace of sauce from his plate with a piece of bread, "what inspired this feast?" Alexis shrugged, trying to look casual. "Nothing in particular. I just wanted to do something nice for you. You know, to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" She hesitated, playing with her fork. "For everything, I guess. For giving me a chance. For believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Jack looked at her with a soft expression. "Alexis, you don't have to thank me for that. Watching you grow into this incredible person, that's been reward enough." Alexis felt her face heat up at the compliment. "Still," she insisted, "you've given up so much for me. Your life, your plans with Liv." The mention of Liv made Jack cringe slightly. Since their confrontation a few weeks ago, they hadn't spoken much about her. "Alexis," Jack said softly, "I haven't given up on anything. I made a choice. And honestly, I don't regret it one bit." They looked at each other for a long moment. a current of unspoken emotion passing between them. Alexis felt her heart racing, a strange, new sensation forming in her chest. The moment was broken by the sound of Jack's cell phone ringing. He looked at the handset and frowned. "It's from the shelter," he said, sounding worried. "I need to take this." Alexis nodded, watching as Jack got up and walked to the balcony to take the call. She began clearing the table, her mind still spinning with the mixed emotions the conversation had stirred up. A few minutes later, Jack returned, looking agitated. "What's wrong?" Alexis asked, immediately worried. "Problems at the shelter," Jack replied, running his hand through his hair. "The heating system broke, and with winter approaching—" "That's terrible," Alexis said, feeling a pang of worry. Over the last few weeks, she had accompanied Jack to the shelter a few times, meeting the residents and seeing firsthand the important work that was done there. "What can we do?" Jack looked at her, surprised. "We can home?" Alexis nodded firmly. "Yes, we can. I want to help, Jack. Tell me what to do." A slow smile spread across Jack's face. "Well, they need volunteers to help distribute blankets and install portable heaters until the main system can be fixed." "Then that's what we'll do," Alexis said, already heading to her room to change. Half an hour later, they were at the shelter. The place was organized chaos, with volunteers running around, carrying boxes of blankets and portable heaters. Alexis found herself in the middle of the action, handing out blankets, helping to install heaters, and even making hot chocolate for the residents. It was hard and tiring work, but somehow incredibly rewarding. On a break, she found herself chatting to an elderly woman called Rose, who had been living in the shelter for a few months. "You're new here, aren't you, dear?" Rose asked, her eyes shining with wisdom. Alexis nodded. "Yes, I'm learning." Rose smiled. "Well, you're doing a great job. You know, it's not everyone who chooses to spend their Saturday night helping strangers." Alexis felt a wave of emotion hit her. "Actually, I should thank you. Being here, helping out, it makes me feel useful in a way I've never felt before." Rose took Alexis' hand, squeezing it gently. "That's how it starts, darling. You discover that there's more happiness in giving than in receiving. It's a lesson some never learn." Alexis looked around the room, her eyes finding Jack, who was helping a group of children build a blanket fort. He met her gaze and smiled, a smile full of pride and something else, something that made Alexis' heart skip a beat. "Yes," she said softly, still looking at Jack. "I think I'm beginning to understand that." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. When they finally finished, it was after midnight. Alexis was exhausted, her muscles aching in a way she had never experienced before. But along with the physical tiredness, there was a sense of accomplishment that was completely new to her. On the way home, Jack drove in silence, but Alexis could feel his occasional glances. "What?" she finally asked, turning to face him. Jack smiled, his eyes briefly leaving the road to meet hers. "Nothing. Just, I'm proud of you, Alexis. You were incredible tonight." Alexis felt her face heat up at the compliment. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Jack said firmly. "Not everyone would do what you did. You chose to help, even when you could have stayed at home. That means a lot." They fell into a comfortable silence for the rest of the way. By the time they reached the apartment, they were both too exhausted to do more than mutter good night before crawling into bed. But as Alexis lay down, her tired body sinking into the mattress, she couldn't help but smile. For the first time in her life, she felt truly satisfied. Not for buying a new pair of shoes or having dinner in a fancy restaurant, but for having made a difference in someone's life. And when she finally fell asleep, her dreams were filled not with the lavish parties and extravagant shopping of her old life, but with smiling faces and grateful hands. And at the center of it all was Jack, his smile brighter than the sun. Winter arrived in Los Angeles with a wave of unusual cold. The streets of Echo Park, normally vibrant and full of life, were quieter, with people preferring the comfort of their warm homes. Alexis wrapped herself more tightly in her coat as she walked back to her apartment after her shift at the coffee shop. Her steps were quick, eager to escape the biting wind. But when she turned the corner onto her street, she stopped abruptly. Standing in front of the building, wearing an impeccable suit and with a stern expression on his face, was her father, Maxwell Hartley. Alexis' heart raced. She hadn't seen her father since the day he had sent her on this mission. Part of her wanted to turn around and run, but she knew she couldn't avoid this confrontation forever. Taking a deep breath, she approached. "Dad," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. "What are you doing here?" Maxwell turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of his daughter. "Alexis," he replied, his voice as controlled as ever. "You look different." Alexis almost laughed. Different was an understatement. Her hair, once perfectly groomed, was tied back in a sloppy ponytail. Her clothes, although clean, were simple and practical, very different from the designer clothes she usually wore. "6 months working in a coffee shop will do that to you," she replied dryly. "But you haven't answered my question. What are you doing here?" Maxwell adjusted his tie, a gesture Alexis recognized as a sign of discomfort. "I came to check on you, to check that this experiment is having the desired results." Alexis felt a surge of irritation. "Experiment? Is that how you see it?" "As some kind of scientific study." "Alexis," Maxwell began, his tone condescending, "you have to understand, I did this for your own good. You were out of control, spending money without thinking, without any appreciation for the value of hard work. And you thought forcing me into an arranged marriage with a stranger was the solution," Alexis retorted, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what I've been through in the last few months? What Jack has been through?" The mention of Jack made Maxwell frown. "Oh yes, Mr. Thompson. Where is your husband?" As if summoned by the question, Jack appeared around the corner, carrying shopping bags. He stopped as he saw the scene before him, his eyes moving from Alexis to Maxwell. "Mr. Hartley," he said, his voice cautious, "this is a surprise." Maxwell studied him coldly. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you're keeping your end of the bargain." Something inside Alexis snapped. "Deal? Is that how you see the marriage of your only daughter?" "As a business deal." Jack quickly moved to Alexis' side, a comforting presence. "Mr. Hartley, with all due respect, I think we should continue this conversation upstairs. It's getting cold out here." Maxwell hesitated for a moment before nodding stiffly. "Very well." The three of them went upstairs in tense silence. When they entered the small apartment, Maxwell looked around with an expression that mixed curiosity and disdain. "So this is where you've been living," he commented, his tone implying that living was a generous term. Alexis felt a surge of defensive pride. "Yes, Dad, this is where I've been living. And you know what? It's been the most enriching experience of my life." Maxwell turned to face her, surprise evident on his face. "Is that so? And what exactly have you learned in this environment?" Alexis took a deep breath, feeling Jack's hand give her shoulder an encouraging squeeze. "I've learned the value of hard work. I've learned that there's more satisfaction in earning something on your own merit than having it handed to you on a plate. I learned how to cook, how to clean, how to manage a tight budget." She paused, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "But most importantly, Dad, I learned about compassion, about helping others not because it makes me look good, but because it's the right thing to do. I learned about community, about belonging." Maxwell looked genuinely stunned. "Alexis, But she wasn't finished. "And you know what else? I learned that I'm stronger and more capable than you ever gave me credit for. You thought I'd go broke without my credit card and my luxurious life. But guess what? I blossomed." Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Hartley, I know you meant well, but Alexis is no longer the same person she was 6 months ago. She's grown, she's changed, in ways that I think would surprise even you." Maxwell looked from Jack to Alexis, a complex expression on his face. I see I underestimated you both." Alexis felt a wave of emotion hit her. It was the closest thing to a compliment her father had ever given her. "Dad, she said softly. "I know you thought you were doing the best for me, but don't you see, by trying to teach me a lesson, you almost missed the chance to really get to know me." Maxwell seemed to age several years before her eyes. "Alexis, I'm sorry, I really thought—" "I know," Alexis interrupted him gently. "But Dad, I'm no longer that spoiled girl who needed a life lesson. I'm a woman who's discovered her own strength. And a lot of that," she looked at Jack with a soft smile, "I owe to Jack." Jack blushed slightly, but kept his eyes fixed on Maxwell. "Mr. Hartley, Alexis is one of the most incredible people I've ever met. She's strong, compassionate, and has a huge heart. And she discovered all this on her own. Not because of some elaborate deal or scheme, but because it's always been inside her. She just needed the opportunity to find out." Maxwell looked between the two of them, a slow understanding dawning in his eyes. "You two, this isn't just a deal anymore, is it?" Alexis felt her heart race. She looked at Jack, seeing in him the same realization she was feeling. "No, Dad," she said softly. "It's not." Jack took Alexis' hand, intertwining their fingers. "Mr. Hartley, I love your daughter. Not because I was paid to look after her, or because I made a promise to you. I love her because she's the most incredible person I've ever met." Alexis felt tears running down her cheeks. "Jack, I love you too." The moment was interrupted by an uncomfortable wheeze from Maxwell. "Well, that certainly wasn't what I expected when I came here today." Alexis laughed, wiping away the tears. "Believe me, Dad, it's not what any of us expected 6 months ago." Maxwell studied them for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I suppose I should admit when I'm wrong. Alexis, you really have changed, and it looks like it's for the better." "Thanks, Dad," Alexis replied, feeling a weight she didn't even know she was carrying being lifted from her shoulders. "And Mr. Thompson, Jack," Maxwell continued, holding out his hand, "I think I owe you a thank you, and maybe an apology." Jack shook Maxwell's hand firmly. "There's no need for apologies, sir. This deal has brought me the greatest gift I could ask for." Maxwell nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Well, I think my work here is done. Alexis, when you're ready, there's a place waiting for you in the company. But only when you want to, not because I'm telling you to." Alexis smiled, feeling truly seen by her father for the first time in years. "Thanks, Dad. I'll think about it. But for now, I'm happy where I am." After Maxwell left, Alexis and Jack stood in the middle of the room, still holding hands. "So," Jack said, a smile playing on his lips, "you love me, huh?" Alexis laughed, pulling him closer. "Shut up and kiss me, you fool." When their lips met, Alexis felt as if all the pieces of her life were finally falling into place. This tiny apartment in Echo Park, so different from the mansion she grew up in, was more home than any place she had ever known. And Jack, this kind and compassionate man who had come into her life by chance, was more family than she ever thought she would have. As night fell over Los Angeles, Alexis Hartley, barista, volunteer and woman in love, knew that she had finally found her place in the world, and it was exactly where she was supposed to be. Spring arrived in Echo Park, bringing with it an explosion of color and renewed life. The trees that lined the streets were laden with flowers, filling the air with their sweet scent. For Alexis Hartley, it was as if the world was celebrating along with her. It was a sunny Saturday morning, exactly 1 year to the day since Alexis had entered that small apartment for the first time. She was standing on the balcony, a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the neighborhood wake up. "What are you thinking about?" Jack's voice snapped her out of her reverie. He joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Alexis smiled, leaning back against him. "At how everything has changed, how I've changed." Jack placed a soft kiss on her temple. "You've grown so much in the last year. I'm so proud of you, Alexis." She turned in his arms, facing him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jack. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Jack's smile was warm and full of love. "You've always had it in you, Alexis. I just gave it a little push." They stood there for a moment, enjoying the quiet of the morning and each other's company. The sound of a notification on Alexis' cell phone broke the silence. "It's Marina," Alexis said, checking the message. "She wants to know if we can cover an extra shift this afternoon at Grind Shine. It seems they're short-staffed." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" Alexis smiled, already typing an answer. "I said we'll be there. After all, it's thanks to Marina that I got my first real job." Jack laughed, shaking his head in admiration. Who'd have thought that Alexis Hartley, the Princess of Beverly Hills, would be looking forward to working an extra shift in a coffee shop? Alexis playfully punched his arm. "Hey, I like my job. Besides," she added with a mischievous grin, "someone has to make sure the best barista in Echo Park doesn't get too cocky." They laughed together, the happiness and contentment almost palpable in the air around them. Later that day, as they worked side by side at Grindshine, Alexis couldn't help but reflect on how much her life had changed. A year ago, the idea of working in a coffee shop would have seemed like a nightmare. Now, it was a part of her routine that she genuinely enjoyed. "Hey, Alexis!" The voice of Rose, the elderly lady from the shelter, snapped her out of her thoughts. "The usual, dear?" Alexis smiled warmly. "Of course, Rose. A chai latte with almond milk, right?" Rose nodded, her eyes sparkling. "You always remember, you know. That's why you and Jack are everyone's favorites here." Alexis felt her heart warm at the compliment. "Thank you, Rose. That means a lot to me." As she prepared Rose's order, Alexis observed Jack on the other side of the counter, laughing and joking with a group of children who often visited the cafeteria after school. He had a special way with people, an ability to make them feel seen and valued. It was at that moment that Alexis had an epiphany. She loved it. Not just Jack, but this whole life they had built together. The job at the coffee shop, volunteering at the shelter, the quiet nights at home watching bad movies on TV. It was a simple life compared to their luxurious past, but incredibly rich in ways that money couldn't buy. When their shift ended, Alexis and Jack walked hand in hand back home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Jack," Alexis said, stopping suddenly, "I have something to tell you." Jack turned to her, a worried expression crossing his face. "What's wrong? Is everything all right?" Alexis smiled, squeezing his hand. "Everything's perfect, really. It's just that, well, do you remember that today marks exactly 1 year since we started this experiment?" Jack nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember. Time has flown, hasn't it?" "Yes," Alexis agreed. "And well, technically, our agreement ends today. I could go back to my old life if I wanted to." Jack's face paled slightly, but he kept his composure. "I see. And is that what you want?" Alexis shook her head vehemently. "No, Jack, that's not what I want. Not at all." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she was about to say. "What I want is to stay here, with you. Not because some agreement forces us to, but because I choose it. I choose this life, Jack. I choose you." Jack's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Alexis, are you sure? I mean, I don't have much to offer compared to what you're used to." Alexis interrupted him with a kiss. When he pulled away, his eyes shone with determination. "Jack Thompson, you offered me more than I ever dreamed of having. You showed me what true love is, what community is, what having a purpose is. That's worth more than any bank account or Beverly Hills mansion." Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his voice laced with emotion. "I love you so much, Alexis. You have no idea how much this means to me." They stood there for a moment, embracing in the middle of the sidewalk, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. When they finally separated, they both had tears in their eyes and beaming smiles on their faces. "So," Jack said, clearing his throat, "what do we do now?" Alexis smiled, entwining her fingers with his. "Well, I was thinking, how about we expand the shelter?" Jack looked at her in surprise. "Expand the shelter? But that would cost a fortune?" Alexis added with a mischievous smile. "As it happens, I know a certain heiress who has access to a sizable trust fund, and she can't think of a better use for that money than to help people who really need it. Jack's eyes lit up at the possibility. Alexis, that would be incredible. We could help so many people. Exactly, Alexis nodded. And you know what? I think we could turn the upstairs into a training center, teach practical skills, help people find jobs. Jack looked at her with admiration. You've really thought about all this, haven't you? Alexis shrugged, a shy smile on her lips. Let's just say I learned from the best. A certain janitor taught me the importance of giving back to the community. Jack laughed, pulling her into another hug. Alexis Hartley, you never cease to amaze me. As they walked the rest of the way home, making excited plans for the future of the shelter, Alexis felt filled with a sense of purpose and contentment that she had never experienced in her previous life. That night, lying in bed next to Jack, Alexis reflected on the incredible journey she had been on over the past year. She had arrived in Echo Park as a spoiled, selfish girl, forced into a marriage she didn't want. And now she was a strong, independent, and compassionate woman, deeply in love with the man by her side and the life they had built together. What are you thinking? Jack murmured sleepily, pulling her closer. Alexis smiled in the darkness, about how sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Jack laughed softly, like a Beverly Hills princess falling in love with a janitor from Echo Park. Exactly, Alexis replied, placing a soft kiss on his lips. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. As sleep enveloped her, Alexis felt a wave of gratitude for everything that had happened. Her father had tried to teach her a lesson, but in the end, she had learned something much more valuable. She had learned about love, compassion, and the true meaning of a life well lived. And there, in Jack's arms, in the heart of Echo Park, Alexis Hartley finally felt at home. The future was full of exciting possibilities: the expansion of the shelter, her job in the cafeteria, and who knows what other adventures life had in store for them. But one thing was certain: whatever the road ahead, Alexis and Jack would walk it together, side by side, hand in hand. Because sometimes the end of a fairy tale is just the beginning of an even better story. And for Alexis and Jack, this was just the first page of their happily ever after.